So, on Tuesday, the next episode is going to be coming out, and it occurs to me that in the weeks since the most recent update to the Living World Icebrood Saga, I haven't covered the stuff that they implemented, which was mainly the return of some Season 1 content. I'll probably do a specific production on that, because it's not really relevant. The introduction of the Eye of the North scrying pool visions, which let us actually play as a Char warband, and another mission which allows us to see how Almora ended up dead in the cave in one of the earlier episodes throughout the saga so far. So this is a pretty cool patch, and obviously if the new one's coming out Tuesday, we really should be looking at this.
Your words make people kill each other.
Maybe you should listen.
So starting the video off, I did want to quickly recap how the story went so far running into this, and that was that the Char were following Bangar out into the mountains in an attempt to subdue Jormag and try to gain it as an ally for themselves, something that Bangar really wants to do, it seems, because he's kind of jealous, if you will, of the power we have with Aurene. You know, there is a character, a living, thinking, breathing person on Tyria right now, the commander, us, that has an elder dragon, as he sees, at our beck and call, and he thinks he can be that too. So as we travel into the mountains, and we know that there's this large Char force out here, we discovered in this patch Drakkar, and learned all about how Jormag was using Drakkar to whisper and influence to people in the mountains. So we go on a massive thing to try and take Drakkar out. Particularly, it's kind of a transformative story for Bram, who spends a lot of time talking with the lost spirits of the wild up here and trying to get them on board. Ultimately, with it all ending with us in a cave underneath the ice.
If they kill Drakkar, who's next?
If we kill Drakkar, then what? Who's next? You'd kill Bangar, then Ryland. Destroy the legions to stop Jormag.
Ryland.
So right after a lengthy battle, and as Drakkar is super weak and we're fighting the voice of Jormag, Bangar comes storming in, and this was how the patch ended, with Bangar taking a pot shot at us, the commander, and pretty much it seems to be would have killed us if Aurene didn't intercede and help us out and get us out. With Bangar confirming that, yeah, he knows the dragon is trying to manipulate people, but he doesn't care. He thinks he's above that. He thinks that's just for weak minds, and he sees it more as a nuisance for his, like, grunts on the ground more than anything else. And then lastly, with Bram discovering how to transform into his totem and assaulting Bangar. Then we kind of black out because we've been shot, and next thing we know, we've woken up in the Eye of the North, and Aurene points out that she's discovered this place, that there's this mysterious waters, the scrying pool, which Guild Wars 1 players will be more than familiar with, and Aurene is very interested in using the powers of the scrying pool to learn more things. She doesn't know for sure whether Jormag is actually telling the truth and really wants to help us, or what. Their true ambitions can't be known, and that's still one of the big questions of the saga.
Wasted no time stealing credit for our kill.
Any Char who thought he couldn't bring an elder dragon to heal is probably having second thoughts now.
And Ryland?
Gone. With him.
So that brings me into this patch, in which the Eye of the North has developed quite a bit. Now, a lot of it's to do with mechanics stuff, incentives for doing strikes, a surrogate that can take you anywhere in the world, different services that you can upgrade here now. But there are a couple of story things too. The kind of jokey fan art story of that, fan fiction you saw at the end of the last Living World season on the airship kind of gets a little bit of development here. If you guys were following closely back when the trailer came out, we did see Kos, if you remember. Kos does come to the Eye of the North, but isn't really a big part of the story here. He talks a bit about how he's been here before and how in the original game people would dedicate a monument to him, and there's a monument which kind of feeds into his ego, which is quite nice, but he wasn't actually really a very big part of the story as all goes. Really, the Eye of the North is more of building up as a hub right now, as it will service the rest of the saga. I would expect more stuff next patch, but really it was the stuff to do with the scrying pool that really pushed the story. So this release did not move us further forward in the timeline. It only gave us insights into parallel stories that were occurring at the same moments as the era of episode 1 into episode 2. So like I said a moment ago, we're going to find out how Almora ended up dead in the cave.
I searched the scrying pool for answers, combing through visions of the past for some way to break the cycle. I haven't found any, but I witnessed something interesting, and I want you to see it.
So as I've mentioned in several videos up to this point, I think what they're doing in the scrying pool here is amazing and could go into some really deep and exciting, interesting places. It has all the potential of fractals, but in such a way that it gets to link in and actually matter for the main story of the game, where the biggest, most exciting stuff can actually happen. So I'm really looking forward to see where the devs go as the saga unfolds. But they've opened up with something fairly tame. I mean, Aureen there says, oh, I want you to see something interesting. It is fairly interesting, but not any kind of, massive lore mind blows here. We're just going to learn a little bit more about Ryland and his history with Bangar, with Ritlock, with Almora.
Aren't you the sorriest bunch of recruits I've ever laid eyes on? Report to Centurion Steelcatcher for work
Storm's getting
detail.
worse. Recruits, pick up the pace.
So mission 1 takes us here amongst the Steel Warband a couple of months ago in the storyline in a map, nondescript location somewhere on the borders of the Char homelands and up into the Shiver Peak Mountains, where, you can see straight away, it looks like a bunch of Norn used to live in this area, but now have evacuated, they're not around. This region, just like with Fractals, doesn't actually one-for-one link up with a specific geographical area topside Ontario. But that's really good, honestly, because this map is huge and has loads of interesting different cubby holes and ruins and places with bouncing mushrooms and giant sniper perches and hidden hallways all over it. It's got snowy areas, and it's got like sulfurous hot springy areas, and it's got green areas, it's got underwater sections. It's a massive place that I kind of think the devs got to do super well just because they didn't really have to assign it anywhere up on Tyria. Yeah, you only really play it for this one mission, but it's a lot like raids in that because they have a specific area of the world made for specific story, it feels great. I actually love this mission, and in my previous video about this, you heard me make this comparison. It reminds me a lot of how it feels to play a campaign mission in any kind of single-player oriented game, especially to me. This feels like I'm playing Halo, and I mean that in a very, very complimentary way. The early Halo games, I think, did things fantastically. Really, this mission, you're running around with a bunch of guys chatting about their lives and what they're doing while escorting this big-ass tank and taking various enemies out. Sometimes you're doing escort-y type things, sometimes it's wave assault, sometimes you've got to go off the beaten path, all ending with a big boss fight. So the mechanics here and the actual experience of playing this mission, I thought was top-notch. If I could canvas all of the Guild Wars 2 story that we've ever had at this quality, I would do it in a heartbeat. Just the idea of experiencing some of those vanilla or even living world quality stories that we've had in the past, like all that personal story stuff at this level would be an incredible experience. But of course, it's taken them many years to get to this kind of bar. I find it impossible to play this without also thinking of the lost game type Fortune's Veil, the world versus world raid style game type where you're marching through the mountains and stuff on this massive map. It feels to me like that's what I always imagined Fortune's Veil would have been like, and it's done excellently. It's even interesting in terms of the way they handle multiplayer here. Like this footage you're watching right now is essentially optional events you can do at the beginning while waiting for people to join, because you can actually play this one 10-man. It doesn't have to be solo, it doesn't have to be 5-man, you can go all the way up to 10 by making it as a public squad. It's like a strike in that way, and you can kind of get this moment for everyone to fill in. I will also, as a side note, compliment the achievements for this release, in which they basically added a long challenge mode version of the mission, where enemies are way more numerous and way harder, and if the tank that you're escorting blows up, you actually fail. It's a story mission where you can actually fail, guys, and it feels amazing. And I say challenge mode, some of you guys are going to be thinking like raids and stuff. It's really not that hard. I think I made 3 attempts, not with the guild or anything, not on a stream or anything, just literally going into the LFG UI and pulling random players in who are active with the game at the moment, and it worked out just fine. It was really, really fun, so I definitely think that will be a powerful thing if the Saga continues to add features like that, because there's nothing more meaningful to me than actually having real combat and real gameplay to experience while, you know, there's some cool story going on. The default mode is very, very hands-off, and pretty much anyone can go through it, and I think that's to be expected. I know a lot of people like that.
Warband's ready to move out, Ryland.
Is that how you address your Centurion, soldier?
That promotion already going to your head, Chief?
He's a big shot now that he's Bangar's golden cub.
All right. Let's get a move on before we freeze our tails off.
So let's talk about the plot progression for this mission. Well, I have to say it's very minimal. At the start of the patch, Aurene explains that Bangar's army is growing, and in fact at the end of the last patch there was kind of a suggestion that now that he's claimed the kill on Drakkar, more and more Char are going to believe in that. If you've watched my video about the trailer for the next release, you would have seen that whole thing about propaganda. Obviously the devs have to express this idea that Bangar's army is getting stronger, otherwise why is he a big threat? This is something more than just one rogue Char and his little followers. This is going to be a big deal. So she mentions that. She mentions that she still doesn't know Jormag's real motives. He might be legit in trying to help us out, who knows? And then she throws us into this mission, which is a weird one for me. So 90% of this is flavorful, character-driven dialogue about getting to know not just Ryland, who obviously has proven himself to be an important character and will continue to be, his place at Bangar's side at the moment and so on. But it's also lots of character development for these newly introduced characters in the Steel Warband. And for them, I'm not too sure how invested to be, because this is like a flashback, and we don't really know what they're doing at the moment. They haven't appeared in the other releases, and we don't really know whether they're going to become important going forward. Now, if I try to imagine how they'd become important, it'd be some suggestion that maybe they decide they don't like what Ryland is doing now, and they're not going to fight alongside him, or maybe they choose to do it, and these will all become antagonists in the upcoming patches. That would all be cool, but because we don't really see that yet, I'm just kind of enjoying myself on a very superficial level when I listen to them. Now, it's all written pretty well, and for Guild Wars 2, I think actually very well. I gave you what looked like a bit of an awkward joke there, where there's that pause and then they all laugh. But overall, they feel like really likable, really distinct, separate characters that I'm sure people will get a kick out of. And I want to say I do appreciate that. It's just that for me, I've always been at a place with Guild Wars where I'm really not that into the character side stuff. I've always been more into the setting and the mysteries and the deep facts and the stuff that really should be grounded by fun and interesting characters. I get it. But for one reason or another, I've just always struggled to get really invested and latch onto specific character beats. You know, I've had moments of enjoying some characters, like Canuck during his darker days, really captivated me and gripped me. And some of the funny, sort of more carefree characters I've enjoyed in the past as well, but never that deeply. Usually what I'm looking for is more stuff about the setting, and this mission doesn't have much of that. So if you're a little bit more like me in terms of your enjoyment out of the plot, then don't expect the most from this. But there's definitely some entertainment value, just in how well executed a lot of their banter and back and forth is.
Bruno, you really believe all that stuff Bangar's selling?
Well, what's wrong with wanting to be one Char? I mean, I think that sounds like a good thing.
We're an independent warband, fighting for a breakaway legion under a rogue imperator. That sound like one Char to you?
We're a kick-ass independent warband fighting for whatever you just said.
Ryland, you agree with me, right? I get orders and I follow them. That's what a soldier does.
So what we just heard there is one of the more interesting ways in which the banter between these characters does tap into the bigger story here. And I think what the devs are obviously going for, especially with Bangar, is a story of a soldier's loyalty. Like, he is very much torn, and you will see through this release a lot as to what degree he really should just be following orders. And in the second mission, we actually get to play as Bangar, and you'll see that go further. So moving deeper into the mission, we find the other story consequence for this mission, and it's the introduction of an old enemy we fought many of in Guild Wars 1, has not appeared yet in Guild Wars 2, but here they are. It's the dwarves, and in fact not just the dwarves, but the Stone Summit. So, this was very cool for me to see. I still remember when Guild Wars 2 was first coming out, the devs at one of the conventions allowed players to design their own dynamic event that would appear in the game in the end. And as a part of this panel, they released some early work-in-progress maps of upcoming regions in Guild Wars 2, and the panelists could choose which ones of these they wanted to set their dynamic event on. And we obviously on the forums got screen grabs of these and looked at what they were annotated with, and one of these annotations alluded to a Stone Summit dynamic event in Guild Wars 2, suggesting the Stone Summit would be in this game, and then they never were. Not until now in 2020. So who are the Stone Summit? A quick crash course. In the original game, there were still dwarves on the surface. They had not turned to stone yet. They had not gone to fight the Great Destroyer. And it wasn't just a bunch of happy dwarves that helped us out. They had two specific different big factions and societies. There were the Deldrimor dwarves, who in general were, for lack of a better word, the good guys, our allies, the ones we worked with the most. And then there was another faction of slaving dwarves that brutalized animals and rode them around on mounts and did all kinds of nasty things, would attack us on sight. Those other dwarves were the Stone Summit. And who does Ryland and co run into here in the mountains 250 years later?
What the hell was that?
There's a vantage point this way.
Well, the dwarves, and specifically Stone Summit. So one of the big parts of this patch is that after the mission is completed and littered through the next mission, you can actually find hidden story journals that talk about why these guys might be here. I'm going to do a separate video on that, where we run through the lore and maybe talk about the consequences of it. But for now, I will say it was a very weird experience fighting these guys. Obviously, I somewhat misspoke a second ago. The dwarves have already been in Guild Wars 2, like with Ogden and Roban, but we never really properly interact with them, certainly not in combat scenario. And yeah, I guess we fought a lot of Asura in the game, so I don't know why this feels so weird. Maybe it's because I'm such a big char. It feels very strange running over and attacking these quite comparatively tiny creatures. But they are like totally new models and they've got new textures and they do look a lot like some of the old Guild Wars 1 art for them, in that they have these very dark faces behind these masks with these glowing eyes. And already you can see from that little soundbite I gave you a second ago, there seems to be something ghostly going on. You know, that horrifying scream we heard is described in the chat log as an otherworldly howl, I think. So there's something creepy and mysterious and necromantic going on with them. And they're pretty interestingly handled in the engine. Just as we saw Dagnar Stonepate rode on a big drake in Guild Wars 1, you actually see that come back in this game too, and they get knocked off. This is obviously something we saw the devs first start using with the Hylic riding on beetles way back in Season 2, and now they've applied it to the Stone Summit riding drakes here. I can't think of a better move for them to make. I seriously geeked out when I saw that that was in this mission, and I think any, you know, long-term fan with memories of the first game will do the same. Like, look at this guy here, it's freaking badass. The warband does remark about them and says, well, hold on, aren't they supposed to be extinct? They don't really wonder why they're not underground, but that's kind of something that I did straight away as well. And they just kind of gloss over it and we decide to fight them. The final boss of this mission is a recreation of the Iron Forgeman, which now no longer is buried in some 2012 content most people don't play anymore, but is a big part of this release with new mechanics. And well, it seems that the Stone Summit had actually reforged him and got him running. Unfortunately, when he dies, they don't reveal that there was some Djinn inside him or anything like that. That would have been a really nice move, since there are Djinn in Guild Wars 2 now. When 2012 came around, there weren't Djinn, so they couldn't do it, but now there have been Djinn in Path of Fire, so you totally could have arenaed it, but that's probably a pretty minor nerdy nitpick there. Here at the end of the first mission, I do want to again compliment the mechanics the devs laid in here. Not only is it a really nuanced, intricate map with loads of stuff, but they've got this like rocket launcher mechanic where you can pick these cannons up and fire them around. It's so appropriate for the char. Everything to do with the tank, the fact that you can actually ride inside it, you can utilize various gunfire while you're in it, you can collect ammunition while you're outside to do so, that actually matters for the boss fight, that they've got like this grapple thing, like when you're in a Warclaw. I think actually technically basically being on the mount, or in the tank is like being on a mount, and it's using your mount binds while you're in it, that you don't actually control where it goes. The fact that you can have 10 players in the squad all riding in the tank with you as you go, like, this stuff's brilliant. If I wrote down all the things I'd like to experience about riding around in a tank with the Char in Guild Wars, this has got to be like the ultimate fantasy, right? Maybe the only thing they're missing is a section where you yourself can actually drive it while a friend of yours is utilizing like the gunner seat or whatever it is, firing that stuff off. Maybe the devs will find that out later. They've implemented numerous bonus events that you can miss or you can do but not do that well. At the end, you're graded basically on your performance, and you can be assigned a rank, a Char rank, which I think goes all the way up to Khan in the end. And there's achievements for all that stuff. It's just really lovingly crafted. It's interesting because this is the first time I think we've seen the devs get to focus a whole release in one very specific place, and you can see how much quality comes out of it, therefore. I say one specific place, but of course we do have another mission. So here's how the story ends after the Forgeman is defeated.
Imperator Runebringer, eyes front!
At ease, soldiers. Centurion Steelcatcher, we were expecting the tank at Leora's Pass.
Complications with the storm, sir. Had to take a detour.
If you had everything under control, why the distress signal?
Miscalculation, sir.
I see. The storms hit us pretty hard, so Centurion Steelcatcher and I will find an alternate route through the pass.
I can provide a security detail, sir.
The Imperator's given his orders. Stand by and await further instructions, soldier.
And with that, we're off on our own, no longer inhabiting this like nameless new recruit, but instead playing as Ryland himself inside the Darkrime Delves. A quick recap, the Darkrime Delves were a dungeon in Guild Wars 1 Eye of the North. When we got outside of the dungeon in Guild Wars 2, the entranceway was collapsed, and I and many other players just assumed that meant, well look, the devs didn't have the time or the inclination to implement the Guild Wars 1 dungeon back into Guild Wars 2. How would they even do that? Well, in this mission, they've decided, no, we do want to do that, which is brilliant for them to break my expectations in that way. They even recreate it quite well, and familiar places to the dungeon in the original kind of come back here. It's a lot like how the Ascalon Catacombs dungeon is totally different in Guild Wars 2, but they picked some of the really iconic vistas and they translate. Well, it's the same on this one. I'm especially impressed that the devs did that because, honestly, Eye of the North was really lazy about its dungeon design and straight up copy-pasted a bunch of locales into a ton of different Frosty dungeons. So the whole exercise kind of feels messy to pursue, but the devs didn't let that scare them off. They went for it. And this time, as you go through, not only do you have the shiny new graphics, and it really does feel very ambient and good in here. I love how soft and brilliant the walls look. The lighting is excellent. But also, you get all of that Guild Wars 2 freedom of movement. You can glide. You can't mount in here, and I think that's absolutely a good move. You couldn't mount in the previous mission either, and a lot of Icebrood Saga for the main story, but I think it's worked out really well. I'm not sure that even crosses people's minds as they play this stuff. But you get to experience their updated engine capabilities with elevators that go up and down, numerous cogs and things to interact with. The ability to actually melt through ice walls, and there's lots of extra ice walls that you might not immediately notice that take you off the beaten path, and there's hidden chests and extra journals and hidden things all over the place. If you only did this mission once, guys, and you treated it very linearly, I recommend you go back and look at all the other little areas you can explore off the beaten path, because it's much bigger than you might realize. Even the combat's not too bad in this one. Unfortunately, they didn't go as far as adding a big challenge version that you can do with 10 players, but the final boss was really well calibrated and was one of the rare situations where I was challenged by Guild Wars 2 on my first time through. And you can play it co-op, as you can see from the footage in the background. They even have a really cool little feature in there that just goes to show the bar of quality they're working at. If you play this multiplayer, which you don't have to, it's really more of a solo experience, your allies see your nameplate change to Ryland Steelcatcher, and in fact in some of this footage coming up, you'll see when I get pinged, I'm running around as Ryland. That's the kind of little details the devs had no need to put in, but because they did, it feels like it's really professionally done. So back to recapping what we knew about this environment before this patch. Well, we couldn't explore it, but what was interesting is that the entrance was the body of Almora. So what you have to remember is exactly how the story went a couple of episodes ago now, when this mission in the Darkrime Delves is taking place. We had the Vigil outpost in the mountains where a bunch of people got influenced by Drakkar and Jormag and slaughtered everyone. But Javi and Almora got away. So then we follow up later and we tracked them down only to find Almora's body. So what happened after Almora got split up from her? Turns out this mission, which involves what Bangar and Ryland were doing at the same time, actually answers that.
Bangar! Are there any more of you? The Vigil needs
Almora, what are you doing here?
Svanir bastards kidnapped me and Javi. Slaughtered the others. They surrendered to Jormag's whispers.
Whispers? The Svanir are Norn savages. Troglodytes, nothing more.
There's no time for this. They still have Javi. Help me save the Vigil.
So the rest of the mission follows us as Ryland watching these two Char discuss recent events, and we begin to wonder what side Ryland really falls on. In the earlier parts of the mission, Ryland spends as much time as possible kind of sucking up to Bangar. Bangar is deliberately talking down about Rytlock. And you'll notice as well that Bangar kind of wanted Ryland alone here, singled Ryland out as if he's his mentor and he's this special guy. We get the impression that maybe Bangar's doing this to get under Rytlock's skin, and in fact we hear later from Rytlock himself that that's kind of how Bangar used to treat him. But when Almora joins the picture, it immediately becomes all about her and her take on Bangar's attempt to ally with a dragon. Now let's remember, Almora is the leader of the Vigil. She has dedicated her life to taking these things out. You've got to remember, this is the same character we heard about, say, in the novels. She's got a lot of history.
They underestimated the general.
What exactly have you been telling him?
The truth.
Your truth. The Vigil, the Pact. We aren't the enemy.
You aren't allies either. Not with that dragon at the commander's disposal.
Your plan is insane! The last thing Tyrion needs is another raging Elder Dragon.
An Elder Dragon on a leash. My leash!
You won't listen to reason. I can't let you do this.
Can't let me? You can't stop me!
So they get into an argument, and yes, as I'm sure you can guess, she does end up dead by the end of these events. The devs do a pretty cool thing where at the end they have us fighting her. We inhabit Ryland as he fights against Almora and we destroy her. And that's one of the reasons why I really like that this was a challenging fight, because Almora should have felt challenging. In a lot of ways, the fact that Almora was killed in that early episode disappointed me, because it seemed very obvious to have her be a part of the Kralkatorrik campaign, finish her story, and then panic in the writer's room and wonder, well, what do we do with this character? Okay, we've got to kill her off. I sort of feel like the devs don't have to do that. It's not like this is a sitcom where it's an actor on the payroll and they've actually got to actively move them away. Maybe she could have just moved more to the background in the same way that Gix leading the Dermond Priory always has been. Did it have to go further than that? I think the devs really thought, yes, because they had a cool story to tell. They had this compelling idea of the player themselves being the one to do it through the scrying pool mechanic. The boss fight itself, and hell, this whole sequence, feels a lot like some of those ending moments of Path of Fire, where they give you a special action allowing you to equip a totally badass new weapon. Instead of it being Rytlock Sahothin at the end of POF, this time it's a Char-made Sahothin, which was really inspired and fun. That's how we melt through the ice walls, but I don't have too much more to say. I'm just looking forward to see Ryland utilize this in some kind of duel against Rytlock with the real Sahothin sometimes later. Magic versus machine, God versus machine. That's going to be beautiful if the devs actually go for that. So there is one other really amazing thing that happens in this instance before Almora dies. A moment, by the way, which does trigger some more doubt in Ryland.
She can't be saved. Make it quick. Is that the smartest move? She's a hero to a lot of Char.
Another son you've lost.
And that is the story mentioning Ajax. So there's a little conversation about this earlier in the mission too, where they actually reveal that it was Almora and Bangar who had sired this character. Ajax is a really interesting thing for the devs to talk about in this mission that I have a ton of respect for, because Ajax was a really theoretically big part of this world and big part of this story, but very unfortunately ended up being a story that was almost entirely self-contained in the 2012 personal story. And if there's one thing I think many of us can agree on, it's that the 2012 personal story was doing way too much, and each individual little story beat never had enough time or energy to be put into it to really flourish. So we know about Ajax, the leader of the Renegades, a group of Char that denied the peace treaty, wanted to continue the battle against the humans, very much aligned and worthwhile subject material for the current plotline with Bangar, who also is frustrated at the Char's position on the world stage. But it's a character that probably most players have no memory of, and most players don't realize that they're probably logging into Guild Wars 2 playing as a version of the commander that actually killed Ajax. So for the devs to go in there and honor the story as it was, no matter how poorly it may have been told, no matter how many players might have forgotten about that, but to actually deliver something that is cohesive and is the best course at all odds, really made me go wide-eyed. I wouldn't have expected the devs to bring Ajax into the story as much as they did here, and I was very happy to see that. If you guys are curious about it, find one of your alts that's near the Vigil storyline and just play through the Vigil stuff, which of course is appropriate because Almora is a large centerpiece there. We did learn back then that Almora was the mother, that was fine, but here we actually find a little bit more about the Bangar inclusion in all of this. So, that's the mission, really. A couple of other standout points. Yes, Cantha was name-dropped. Bangar talks about how he wants the Char to be renowned everywhere, from here to Cantha. Cantha obviously wasn't really mentioned much by the story ever, specifically in voice acting, and yet here, in the release right after they announced that teaser for the next expansion, we hear Cantha. I think a lot of people sat up when they heard that one. And another interesting point was, when Ryland pries into Bangar's specific plan with Jormag, it sounds like he's just winging it, and he doesn't really have a deep plan at all, which suggests he's totally gonna fail, right? I mean, balls in Jormag's court on that one. I still can't help but remember, right at the start of this saga, when we were at Grothmar, there was that Easter egg suggesting a bone skinner had been crawling up to Bangar's office and interacting with him. Is he still being manipulated on a deeper level, or is he just a bit of an idiot? Nonetheless, a really badass, cool Char idiot. I guess we'll find out on the next patch on Tuesday. So thanks very much for watching, guys. Keep an eye out tomorrow. I will show you the optional lore book stuff, and we'll talk a little bit about this lore with the Stone Summit and wonder whether maybe they'll come into the story a little bit more. And as always, please let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Hopefully this has been a cool refresher for many of you guys who probably haven't played this for like, what, 5-6 weeks? So thanks, guys. Take it easy. I'll see you next time.